Today we've got Sister Carino with us, who has recently written a book, The Dignity of Women in the Modern World. So we're going to be talking all things femininity, what it means to be a woman in an age where the world is asking, what is a woman? And digging into, what we think has gone wrong, what we need to go back to, and really just the roots of womanhood, because I think we've actually lost that. I mean, we are living at a time now where femininity coaches are so popular.
Really?
And people are actually employing them to teach them, how do I be a woman? So, what do you think has happened for us to get so far that we don't even know what it means anymore?
To be a woman. I would say that it really starts actually with a more deeper question, which is, what is a human person? And because we've lost sight of that question, what makes us human? What makes us different from other parts of the created world? What makes us different from other animals? And what is the purpose of human life? And also, what is the point of us being what we call a sexually dimorphic species? Like, what is the point of us being embodied as male and female? Because we've lost sight of all those fundamental questions about the human person in general, then we find ourselves getting stuck on issues a bit further down the road, as it were, about what does it mean to be feminine? What is a woman? What is my purpose? What is my role in society and in the church? All of these issues, we're right up close to them here. But then when we take a step back, we can see that actually the fundamental issue is, do I actually know what it means to be a human person? Do I know what it means to be created in God's image and likeness, as the scriptures tell us? That's really that's I would say where our difficulties start. And that also, I think, explains something about when Pope St. John Paul II writes about womanhood and about the dignity of womanhood, he actually starts by talking about the human person and our creation as male and female. And then when he's confident that we've all kind of grasped the idea of our shared human dignity, that's only when he moves on to talk about sexual difference, and in particular what makes women distinct from men. So I think we need to all take a bit of a step back and look at our kind of underlying beliefs about actually what is the point of human life at all, what makes a human person unique and distinct within creation.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. So it's almost like we have to go back to a very simplistic way of understanding the fact that it's a truth that we are a human person, and what does that mean in today's world? But I'd love to ask you, as we're both millennials, we both returned or came to the faith.
Yes.
So I suppose, what brought you to faith, if you can say that somewhat briefly, and then B, what made you really take an interest in this idea of womanhood and personhood and the complementarity of men and women?
Yeah. So, I mean, fundamentally, when people ask, sort of how did you end up as a Catholic? I mean, the answer is just like by God's grace, which it is for all of us, right?
Yeah.
But how that specifically played out in my life, God really speaks to us through our desires.
Yes.
And I think what I wanted kind of growing up, becoming a teenager, becoming a young adult, was a sense of purpose and meaning that wasn't totally self-invented. I never found the idea of like just self-creation or self-invention actually very appealing. It felt more like a burden or like an escape from reality. Whereas I had this kind of instinctive desire to discover something true and to feel like I've actually hit upon something that's true, like it's rock solid true. And at that point, that was just like an instinct. So I'm kind of like 16, 17 at this point. That was just an instinct. Sometimes you get these intuitions and they turn out not to be real. They turn out not to be right. But I wondered if actually this kind of feeling I had of actually some things are objectively true. Something about me is objectively true. And life is actually about discovering rather than inventing that truth.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm right about this. And so I kind of looked into it, and I did like philosophy and ethics at A level, and those kind of A levels where you can sort of, the humanities ones where you can do kind of deep dives into things. And I was distressed to discover that I agreed with a lot of Catholics. Because, I'm like that sort of, like Da Vinci Code generation, where when I think of, as a child or as a teenager, when I thought of Catholicism, I thought of like albino monks flagellating themselves.
Yeah.
And like
really understand.
Women in like little dark boxes called confessionals wearing black veils and looking very oppressed. Yes. And like the film, like the kind of the Hollywood film aesthetic version of Catholicism. So when I thought of Catholicism, I thought like weird, obscure,
oppressive,
archaic. Let's stay away from that.
Yes.
It had a whole vibe. It had good costumes, but I didn't really think there was anything more appealing under that. Yeah. So when I actually kind of looked under the bonnet, as it were, of Catholicism and discovered that things like the idea of God as the source of truth and goodness, and if we exist, it's because we participate in some way in that ultimate truth, goodness, existence. He shares his life with us. Mm-hmm. God shares his life with us, and all the damage and destruction we can see in the world around us isn't meant to be there. It's a product of original sin, and God gives us the sacraments of his church through the ministry of his son Jesus to heal us. So there's also a way out of it. Mm-hmm. Like all of this actually just slotted stuff into place for me. Yeah. But because I'm quite like a thinky person, the temptation was to be like, just like, ooh, like this is a nice theory. Yeah. Like this looks great on the page. But I had to actually go out and like meet some real Catholics, and actually like be embedded in a community. Yes. Obviously that was quite dangerous, because then I discovered that the albino flagellating monk stereotype does just exist in Dan Brown novels, and that actually when you meet real life like priests, monks, nuns, sisters, they're actually quite nice people, and they're all quite, I hesitate to use the word normal, because we're all a little bit weird. It's okay, we're all a little bit weird. On
that spectrum.
That's fine.
Yeah. But also funny and like light.
Yes.
There was like a joyful.
Yeah. And I remember at one point getting to the point where I could appreciate that this stuff was objectively true on the page, but at the same time, the people who were living it were also noticeably happy, and that those were two kind of converging arguments. Because I think if I'd just known happy Catholics, I thought, well, maybe they're just deluded. And if I'd just known the argument on the page, I would have thought, well, maybe this just looks great on the page, but it doesn't actually work in the real world. Yeah. But having both at the same time, that kind of brought me to the point where I thought, actually, I can take the next step. I can actually ask to join a parish RCIA program and actually come into the faith. So I was baptised when I was nearly 20.
Okay.
Yes. And with the woman side of things, yes. As in like the issue of women's dignity in the church, it started off more as like an apologetics argument. Mm-hmm. It started off because I knew that people were going to ask me questions about why have you done this? Hello doggy. Why have you done this? Why have you come into this oppressive patriarchal church? So I was like, I want to have arguments. Yeah. So
let me debate.
So like, and also friends could see that I wanted to do that. So my Catholic friends would recommend me books. Yes. They say, well, have you read, Edith Stein's Essays on Women, Alice von Hildebrand, all of that. Why don't you look these people up? And so I was just basically quote mining these people. Yeah. And I mean, it sunk in enough that I took St. Teresa Benedicta as my confirmation saint. Wow. It was appealing enough that I took it in that way. But because it was just on the level of kind of, I want arguments to prove to people that the Catholic Church is an anti-woman, it didn't really actually sink in very far. And actually, like a year or so, actually, I think, before I wrote the book, I remember thinking to myself, wow, when I was 20, I was really into Catholic feminism, and it's like it just kind of bounced off me, because once I got settled in my state of life, like once I became more kind of at peace with the fact that this is who I am, all my friends and family know I'm a Catholic, that's just kind of background noise now, no one's picking fights with me, I've entered religious life, that's just pootling along quite nicely. I didn't feel the need to have this kind of arsenal of like quick fire arguments for women's dignity. And so coming back to it at this stage in my life, when I've made final profession, so I've made my life, my vows for life, I'm going deeper into that understanding of myself as having a spousal vocation, as being, you know, a bride of Christ, imaging the church who is the bride of Christ, and retaining and deepening my femininity in a life which doesn't have a lot of the outward trappings that people nowadays associate with femininity. Like, I wear this every day. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't get to pick my own clothes. I don't have long hair. I don't have my own sort of style of makeup or sort of style or fashion or whatever. There's a lot of stuff that I don't have that people associate with femininity, but I can feel myself growing in my femininity. So coming back to the church's teaching on women's dignity, feeling more settled and less kind of argumentative, has been really interesting.
I love that you said a lot in my mind. I'm thinking, okay, because you said that there was something about discovering the truth, and I always like the idea of, you know, reinventing yourself. And recently I've come to a conclusion, I suppose, that it's not really about reinvention. It's about uncovering like who it was that God made you to be. And I think that can be a lifelong journey. And I think I love your point about femininity looking differently, because, you know, if people are only associating femininity with sundresses and red lipstick, then that's completely just one aesthetic of it. And I think that was an interesting point that you touched on. But I would love to ask you particularly, what do you think the secular world gets wrong about Christianity's worldview of women? Because I often see these memes on Instagram which say, you know, feminism gave us X, Y, and Z, and then, oh wait, that was actually Christianity. But a lot of people don't realise that. So what would you say to a, you know, an activist kind of feminist secular who has no idea what Christianity did for the dignity of women?
I would say that the stumbling block that we have is motherhood. Because Christianity, with its very radical teaching on the equality and the dignity of persons, that each human person has an intrinsic dignity that cannot be taken away from them, and exists even if they are at a very early stage of their development. They're a child, even a child in the womb. If they have a profound disability, even if they're very elderly, actually that dignity still persists. This is the gift that Christianity has given to the world. But at the same time, Christianity has a great respect for the role of motherhood. Not just motherhood as a biological reality, although that's very important, but also motherhood as this more all-encompassing spiritual attitude that women have of being ready to welcome new life. And that's shown kind of most intensely in biological motherhood, but it's there in all women, in our embodied capacity, which is also like a spiritual capacity because we're body and soul, to be ready to welcome and to protect the rights of the other person. But motherhood is something that makes us both powerful and vulnerable at the same time. And the modern world just loses its mind over the idea of vulnerability. We don't know, our secular culture just doesn't equip us to understand that the thing that makes us powerful, the thing that makes us dignified, the thing that makes us able to contribute to society, to culture, also in some ways makes us vulnerable, weak, dependent on others. And in motherhood, these two things come together very intensely. So that is, I think, our stumbling block. And another thing I think to bear in mind is that one of the reasons it might be difficult to understand the unique contribution that Christianity has made to our understanding of human dignity is because it has become so embedded in our culture that we don't realise how odd it is to have this sort of muscle memory, if you like. As a society, we might have lost the practice of Christianity, but we still have that, like musicians talk about having muscle memory. So like as someone who plays the organ, sometimes I think to myself, I can't remember how to play that piece, but I don't know what those notes mean. But then I put my hands on the keys and it just kind of comes out because my fingers are used to doing it. And in the same way, I think as a culture, we've forgotten how to read the sheet music of Christianity. But when we put our hands on the keys, Christian sounding stuff comes out. So this idea that, this idea of equality, of women's rights, this is the Christian muscle memory. but we don't think of it as Christianity because we've had the privilege of benefiting from it for centuries. And now that we're starting to lose a lot of, now that we have lost a lot of the outward signs of Christianity in our culture, I think one of the things we're going to realise, and that we can say to the secular culture, is a lot of the stuff that we've taken for granted in our society is actually the result of that Christian muscle memory, those exercises of actually treating everybody with equal dignity. And if Christianity taught us that thing that we value so much, maybe the other parts of Christianity that grate a little bit against us, that we find a little bit harder to understand, maybe it's worth sitting with those for a bit. Maybe it's worth trying to understand that a bit more deeply, because it comes from the same ultimate source, Christ, from which the other parts of Christianity that we've just embedded into our culture as good things come from.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because we're seeing such a high rise in the generation of like anxious women or women who are experiencing loneliness or just feeling lost. Yeah. And I think in the modern world, it may be, you were talking about, what we call as Catholics like spiritual motherhood.
Yes, yes.
And I have a bit of a theory in line with this whole girl boss era.
Yeah.
The girl boss era was really huge. I think now the generation younger than us are almost taking a step back and saying, actually, is this...
You don't want to be a girl boss.
Yeah, I don't want to be a girl boss. Maybe this was a lie. But at the same point, that girl boss came from, this huge capacity that women have.
Yeah.
To build, to, encourage, to generate.
Yes.
I think that all women have this generative energy.
Yes, yes.
And obviously we pour it into motherhood, and we pour it into mentorship or volunteering.
Yeah.
Like at my charity, almost all of our volunteers are women because our hearts are so big for giving. Yeah. And I think sometimes when we deny that, we then are denying ourselves and our nature.
Yes.
And even I'm seeing the rise, I've got a dog myself, in single women who have dogs.
Yeah.
And often people say, they're either like, they're replacing children with dogs, or, our dogs becoming, whatever, too human. But I was thinking about this and I thought, actually, I think these are women who would love to be mothers, would love to be married. They haven't found themselves in that position yet. Yes. And they have all this love to nurture and to take care. Yeah. Because you do see more single women than single men with dogs. And it's quite an amusing observation. But I think it does come from that innate motherhood that all women have, even if it's not realised biologically. And I think that's something that's really hard for the secular world to quite understand.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I hadn't thought about pet ownership in that way. I mean, before I came here, before I got the bus, I was just sitting in a park for a bit, and I did notice not a huge number of children, but a lot of dogs. Yes. I made some great dog friends today, I have to say, on my way down here. And I think what we see when you look at all human beings is this desire to build some kind of community, some kind of connection. Yes. And when Pope St. John Paul II talks about the human person, he says that we have what he calls a biblical beginning. And it's the truths that we have in Genesis chapters 1 and 2. This idea that we're made for relation, and we're made for self-gift. We're constantly seeking to give ourselves to somebody else. But society can sometimes be set up in such a way that movement towards giving ourselves for the good of another, for something outside of ourselves, kind of gets either thwarted or misdirected or taken in unexpected directions, maybe not the fullness of what a self-gift can be. And what JP2 says about women is that because of our capacity for motherhood, we're built for this special communion with the mystery of life. That's the phrase he uses. It's a special communion with the mystery of new life. And therefore, what the aspect of human nature that men and women both share, which is particularly acutely, obviously, intensely manifest in womanhood, is that focus on the person. Yes. The focus on the person in themselves, regardless of their particular abilities, their particular what they can bring to the situation. Actually, communion with the person for their own sake is something that feminine personhood is particularly attuned to. And we want that to come out in some way. All women want that to come out in some way, and so we find ways. You know, life is, you know, our kind of vocational discernment in a way can be thought of as actually, where can my self-gift be most intense? You know, where do I find that life-giving energy when I give myself and actually receive so much back in return?
But then I think the friction is that we're all being told, you know, self-care, self-love, and also we are like a toxically productive society, and we feel we put our worth in achievements. So what would you say to the woman who just is feeling exhausted? She's trying to hold everything together, whether that, you know, that's work and family life or whatever her kind of responsibilities are and duties, but she's also trying to, you know, make her way in her career or just hold things together, because it can feel too much. And I think a lot of women are feeling at the brink of a breakdown because they don't know how to do it all. And do you think it's because of that friction?
I'm going to kind of call on the wisdom of my prioress, my superior, because when I feel exhausted and when I feel like I'm not doing enough and I'm not doing anything right, I'm not doing anything well enough, she always says to me, you know, when I pour out my woes, she says, but who's the template? What's the template? Like, what aren't you doing as well as? Like, who aren't you doing as well as? I'm like, and I sort of say, well, as well as I could be. And she says, well, but according to who? And often we invent in our minds this idea of the perfect version of ourselves, and we assume that this is the standard that God is holding us to, or this is the standard that other people are holding me to. But in fact, it's self-invention. You know, it's that idea of I'm not doing as well as ... as well as who. And one of the things I think you learn about in religious life is essentially you have a very structured life. You know, bells ring telling you what to do at any given time. It is very intense, you know, kind of spiritually and physically. And what you learn quite quickly is that you can't do it. Like, you just can't do it. You can't do it, and you have to ask for forgiveness, for exceptions. You've got to get to the point where you just say, I'm too tired, can I go to bed, please? You've got to say, I totally forgot to do that. I find that really hard to cope with. But the thing is, you say all these things, not just like to yourself. You say them in your relationship with the other sisters and with your superior. And then you discover that actually you can do it, because the point of religious life isn't to like tick all the boxes of I did everything right today. It's going deep into a relationship with the people around you. And I think it's the same for all of us. We have this standard of, have I ticked all of my self-hit boxes? But I feel like actually the great skill that we need to develop is expressing our human weakness, our human fragility, our human vulnerability in the healthiest possible way that opens us to spiritual flourishing. Like being able to say to your spouse, to your flatmates, to your parents, to your boyfriend, to your colleagues, I can't do all of this. Can we share it out? Or I'm afraid I just can't cope with all of this at once. And using that as an opportunity to go deeper into relationship with the people around us. Because we don't often, things like the relational goals that we set they are actually kind of achievement goals. Do you know what I mean? They're not actually relationship goals. They're more, can I get married by this age? You know, or like, can I go on this many dates by the end of the year? Can I have got this promotion at work? Can I have won the adulation and praise of all the people around me by this stage before I hit 30 or whatever? Like, they are actually achievement goals rather than relationship goals. Whereas relationship goals, it's just being in communion with the people around us. It doesn't always look very impressive. It doesn't always look very impressive. But it's actually where our deepest fulfillment is. And so this is a very long rambling answer. As you can see, I haven't hit I haven't hit the external goal of giving you a short answer to this question.
It's so interesting what you said about, it's not even necessary that you're comparing yourself to other people. You might be comparing yourself to an expectation you've played on yourself, but it's also very inward. And a lot of the modern culture is very inward. You know, we think we're digitally connected, but we're sitting alone on our phones looking at this curation from other people. Or we are also displaying a curation of ourselves. And I remember reading recently that for friendship to flourish, it needs vulnerability, positivity, and consistency.
Oh, I like that.
I actually feel like what you're saying is actually what we need to do is be a little bit more outward and say, actually, I'm not coping very well with this, or I do need this, rather than just talking in our heads. And I went to a talk recently where the speaker said that solitude is a temptation. Ooh. And because my personality, I just never get bored, because there's always something to read or learn. So the temptation to just be cozy at home and read and just, you know, be on my own or with my pets, it's so high. Like sometimes it requires so much motivation for me to go out, and I always love it. I always feel better.
I mean, to be fair, your flat is very nice.
Thank you.
If I lived in your flat, I would be.
I know, I'm just like, just cozy, just needs a fireplace. But yeah, and I think that is a temptation. And I saw recently there's loads of these like lonely girls clubs and things. So they're members clubs for women who just feel that they don't really necessarily have a community. And I do feel that community is the answer to
so many things.
So many things.
We're made for embodied connection. Like to actual, and this is the thing, this is partly what I don't get. The freak out over AI so much of like, does it rival human intelligence? Because I think, well, but it's not embodied. Like so much of what makes us humanly intelligent and unique within creation is that we express our rationality within embodied relationships where actually you're with another person in the same room. Because there's so much you pick up about another person from their embodied self that you don't like on a Zoom call.
Well, actually, I think maybe it was National Geographic that said our brains actually find it so draining to be on a Zoom call because we can't see all of the body language. We kind of get cut from here. So our brains are trying to understand the communication without the body language. And it's interesting because I recently changed jobs where I'm on Zoom a lot less, and I've been so much less tired.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I've really felt it. And embodiment has actually been a word that's been on my heart a lot, because I do think it's so necessary. And I think that's something that we can also learn from like religious life. Because, for example, I think as a single woman, I live alone. And I remember hearing a few people saying like, don't live alone if you feel called to the vocation of marriage, and because you won't have that community. I'm blessed because I've got my family very, very close by. So I go over 2-3 times a day, which is really nice. But what do you think women can do to really ensure that they are having this community and they are... And also about the rhythms. I thought it was interesting what you were saying, that obviously at times it can be a bit overwhelming, or the schedule, the timetable that you have. But how important do you think structure and rhythms in our life are?
I would say structure and rhythm very important, as long as we all remember it's a means to an end. So like the thing with the religious life, we have a lot of what we call, in my form of religious life, which is the Dominican, the Dominican life, we have a lot of what we call regular observances. So it's the structure of the life of things like the times of silence, the common meals, the common times of prayer, times of study, etc., etc. And all of these are means to the end of growing in charity. So they're not an end in themselves. So you can do it in this kind, if you shouldn't, but you could, if you wanted to, do it in this just kind of like dry tick box
exercise,
and actually in a way like be surrounded by other people, but actually kind of mentally shut off from them, if you see what I mean. If you see just the rule as an end in itself. So having the structure in your life as a means to an end, like is this discipline I hold myself to, is this discipline helping me to enter into relationships with others? Is it helping me to know the good better, my own good better, and others' good better? Is it helping me to desire that good as well? Because these are kind of the basics of what JP2 and the whole Catholic tradition understands human dignity to consist of. This idea that we're made for relationship and that we're rational so that we can know the good and also desire the good, and that's what constitutes freedom. In terms of community, I think we can tie this into what's happening with kind of the quiet revival at the moment. Because I was at a talk recently by Monsignor John Armitage, and he said a Guardian journalist was asking him, like, well, more people are coming to church, so you must have done something. Like, you must have done something different. And he's like, I haven't actually. I've been doing the same old thing, parish life. I've been doing parish life, but you stay faithful to it. You stay faithful to the liturgy, the sacraments, the private prayer, the groups and the different groups in my parish. You stay faithful to it, and it bears fruit. And I think we might be tempted to reinvent the wheel, but actually, going back to what you were saying about, you know, the vulnerability, the positivity, and the consistency, doing stuff that seems a little bit passé, like that's what, you know, my grandparents' generation did, but actually just doing it consistently. Of like, are you part of your local parish church? Because I think as well, the great temptation is to like shop around for somewhere that feels right for you. But what if you just like left your front door, walked down the road to the local parish church, and got to know the people there, including the people who first strike you as a little bit weird or annoying? What if you actually hung around with them every Sunday, consistently? What if you got to know your neighbours a little bit? An author who I really like on this subject is Leah Libresco-Sargent, and she put on her Substack recently, I think she called it Dependency Bingo, and it was like a bingo card of things where you could ask another person for help, even if it felt a little bit embarrassing. But just local people or people in your community where you could go and say, you know, I'm not very good at this, or I noticed that you've just had a baby, would you like me to cook some meals for you? That kind of thing. So we have
lost that though. We've lost the, I suppose it's because we want to look like we've got it all together. So actually to ask someone else for help, and it's funny you say that, because I just created a WhatsApp group today for the 2 neighbours who live on the same floor as me, because I think we might have a wasp nest on our roof, and I wanted to see if they were being impacted. But
crisis brings us together.
It does. But I remember I have one dress, and I actually cannot do the zip myself. For some reason, there's something about it, I just cannot do it. So I have to go knock on my neighbour, and I ask her, and I say, do you mind doing it for me? And it's those little things that make you realise you're not alone. And also I like what you're saying about parish, because also I think we're so tribalistic now. We don't really enter into intergenerational friendships. So we don't necessarily have, you know, like a wonderful 70-year-old friend or a 20-year-old friend, and sometimes it might feel like, oh well, they're not in my age bracket. And I worry as well with women that we do that vocationally as well.
Oh, that's interesting.
I think we do. So you often find, especially as you kind of enter into your 30s, if you are not married and with children, you start to almost sometimes distance yourself from your friends who are. Because you can feel, and I'm speaking personally, you can still feel a little bit left out, or you can feel jealous or envious, and it can be difficult. And then suddenly you find yourself in this little ghetto of single women, and you're talking about your woes, and it can almost feel like, well, they're the only ones who understand me, so then I have to only be with them. So I'd love to hear your advice to women who feel like their lives haven't started yet. They're finding it hard to really be in community, because maybe it's painful for them to be around young families or married couples. Because again, I think this idea of community is so important, but for some it can almost feel like bear a bit of suffering as well.
And I think that's where I'd give sort of the opposite advice to what I said about the discipline and structure of your life. About, okay, discipline and structure, that's a means to an end. Community is an end in itself. And it does actually feel difficult and awkward sometimes. And sometimes it feels like you're receiving more than you're giving. And we lose sight of the fact that all of us have something to give into a community, and that actually maybe our married friends or our friends who are religious sisters actually would still appreciate and benefit from your company as a single person. Do you know what I mean? Rather than thinking that actually, well, it must actually be the other way round. With this kind of like vocational kind of ghettoization, as it were, and feeling like life is sort of on hold until you've got like a state of life. I think it's always worth remembering that all of us are currently living out our vocation if we have been baptised. So I think a lot of us think that like the sacraments that start your vocational life in the church are like the sacrament of matrimony and the sacrament of holy orders, you know, if you're a man called to the priesthood.
Yeah.
Or, you know, or religious life, which isn't a sacrament, but, you know, it's a separate state of life. So the idea that, like, once you've entered into that, that's when your kind of vocational part of your life begins. But actually, the vocational part of our life begins when we are baptized. That's when we receive our the universal call to holiness. Baptism is the sacrament that makes saints. And therefore, there is a way of living out your vocational dignity, the calling you have as a Christian today, and not just as preparation for a state of life. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
Like, not just as preparation for a state of life.
Yeah.
Because there are some people who will not enter into the sacrament of matrimony or enter religious life.
Yeah.
But they have received that foundational sacrament by which we become part of the church, by which we become part of the mission of the church, where we receive the gifts and the virtues that we need to bring Christ into the world. And actually thinking of what we have to offer in a vocational way as a single and unattached person, so that you can go into a community setting actually feeling confident that I've actually got something to offer here.
Yes.
I'm not just here to see if there are any young single men.
Which is also a temptation.
Though I do also remember, like, when I was in the world, like, and you'd go to kind of Catholic events, and like there would be some young single men in the room, and they'd be like, "Oh, hello," and then you could kind of see them like looking at your finger before going to your face. It was like a kind of like, and your,
this
your
is
friend,
the checklist.
just
Okay.
checking. Yeah, like, imagine not doing that when you walk into a room. You know, just imagine. So just not seeing the community as a means to discovering your vocation, but actually being in that community as living out your vocation as a baptized Christian right
I think
now.
that's so important, because I definitely had a season when I was going to events to kind of see who was there.
Yeah.
Maybe he's there, my husband. And I really had to talk myself out of that and say, I want to go to an event because I want to learn. I want to be the speaker. I want to go, and really telling myself that the room is always better because we're in it.
Yes.
Is so important, because this imposter syndrome like hits us everywhere. And I think sometimes, especially in kind of Christian circles, there can feel like there's a tier system, and it can feel like if you're single but you want to be married and you're over a certain age, that you feel almost like you've tiered yourself out and you've not leveled up. And that was another problem that I had, I think, because there's this whole concept of maiden, mother, matriarch. Those are these are the three stages of womanhood. And I suppose because I'm still in maiden, and a lot of my friends have overtaken me there in mother, I felt left behind, and I felt a bit like, am I not a fully embodied woman yet? And I know that sounds strange, but I think a lot of us can feel that way. What would your response be?
I would go back to what Pope St. John Paul II says, and when I quote him, I'm usually quoting from his letter Mulieris Dignitatem, which is on the dignity of women, which is amazing because it's written in like 1988, but is becoming increasingly resonant, I think, in the modern era. He talks about motherhood as being an aspect of all women's vocations. So all women have an aspect of motherhood to their vocation. It's not a stage that you enter into at a certain point. Obviously, biological motherhood is a stage you enter into at a certain point. It's very, as any woman who's ever been, pregnant or given birth, it's kind of obvious when that's, this feels different. And but motherhood itself, that capacity, that readiness to welcome the other, is something we embody at every stage. And you say maiden. Another word from the Christian tradition that we could use for maidenhood is virginity. And Pope St. John Paul II talks about virginity as an aspect of all women's vocations, which sounds mad. But what he means by virginity is actually that deeper Christian meaning of the wholehearted pursuit of the love of another. And in the Christian tradition, especially in documents like Lumen Gentium, which is the Second Vatican Council's document on what the church is, like who the church is, the word virginity is applied to beliefs before it's applied to bodies. So the virginal attitude of faith is, my faith is something I keep intact, wholehearted. You know, this pure devotion to my faith, and that's why we talk of Our Lady as a virgin. Her physical virginity is like that kind of outward sign of that inner purity of heart, that wholehearted conviction. And so we talk of this openness to the other person and that intense wholehearted conviction as the two aspects of the woman's vocation. So that's the motherhood and the virginity. And you can live that out at any stage of your Christian life.
I love that definition. I've never heard that before. I'd love to round this up by really looking at a few of the caricatures of womanhood. So you know, you have like the trad wife, the girl boss, and also talking a little bit more about how people view, you know, womanhood. Like I said, the dress, the makeup and things, and how you would explain that it's not just about that. Because I think sometimes women who might have more of a tomboyish style might feel like they're just not in line with what it means to be feminine, and they feel excluded, and that doesn't make sense because they're women. So by the fact that they're created a woman, they are womanly.
Yes, exactly. I mean, that just sums it up really. I think one of the saddest symptoms of our confusion over sex and gender is that people have become quite protective about certain kind of culturally conditioned characteristics of male and female, and this idea that because some people advocate for this very kind of anti-biological, sort of anti-realist view of gender, where you can just where it is kind of self-invention. People have become a little bit defensive about sort of quote unquote traditional, you know, if you're a girl, just act like a girl. If you're going to be a boy, just act like a boy. You know, and we've become a bit more rigid in these kind of external, culturally conditioned ideas of femininity and masculinity, which is very sad, because basically what the church teaches is that femininity is anything done in a feminine body. You know, if you're embodied as a feminine human person, you are feminine by definition. We are both feminine, right? If you are embodied as a male human person in a male body, what you do and say is masculine. You know, so like. So Sister Lucy and I, yesterday, when we came up to London on the train, we were like, you know, knitting and talking about our feelings. And you might think like, okay, well, that's a feminine thing to do. Like, it's feminine. It's feminine because it was done by two human persons embodied in a feminine body, in a female body. If two Dominican friars had been sat there knitting and talking about their feelings, that would have been a masculine act. And so if I go out and I don't know, this is South London, so there aren't any grizzly bears, but like if I went out and killed a grizzly bear with my bare hands, made into a hat, you say, oh, that's a masculine thing to do. I know it would be feminine because I did it.
Yeah, sister, I think that concept is quite interesting, and I think people might argue against it because in the sense of, we live in a time now where gender, masculinity, femininity, the complementarity of both has really been blurred. So I saw this video yesterday, it was hilarious. It was a girl, she was refilling something in her car engine. So she had to open up her car and put it in, and she'd put this voiceover that like, oh, she's so manly and like she's ready to go to war, and this is how she feels because she's fixing her car and changing a tyre. And of course, like, you know, I laughed at it, I thought that's funny. And in my mind, changing a tyre is a masculine act because it requires more physical strength. So for me, I'd be like, yeah, I would like my dad or my brother or, you know, one day my husband to do that for me. So you're challenging me quite a lot with this, because in my mind, there are some things that are innately, there's a term which is like blue job or pink job. So like the blue job is like the man takes the rubbish out because that's a blue job. The woman cooks because that's a pink job. So what would you say to these kind of ideas of ideal masculinity, ideal femininity? And adding another maybe controversial point on that, what are your thoughts on like women wearing trousers and more kind of, you know, masculine clothing?
So I think this is another example, this is another sort of area where religious life can help us, because in a convent of women, there are no blue and pink jobs. Like no one else is going to take the bins out for us. but ourselves.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So I think
Yes.
you get less attached to kind of sort of culturally conditioned ideas of what's a woman's job, what's a man's job,
Yeah.
because in the convent they are all women's jobs. And in the same way, like in a priory of men,
Yeah.
all the jobs are men's jobs because you've just got men. So I think you get a bit less attached to the idea that some stuff is sort of sex segregated. So yes, we talk about femininity being what is embodied by women.
Yes.
Masculinity is what is being embodied by men.
Yeah.
At the same time, we can talk of what Pope St. John Paul II calls the feminine genius. So the attributes of all human persons that are lived out with a particular intensity or obviousness by women. And those tend to be, he argues, the church proposes for our belief,
Yeah.
the more person-centred ones, seeing the person as they are. The flip side of that would be the masculine genius, and this isn't sort of tightly defined by the church,
Yeah.
but it's sort of implicit, is the aspect of human dignity where we are able to steward and to master our external environment for the good of others. That we can say belongs a little bit more to the masculine dignity. And actually there's an article by a Catholic psychologist called Dr. Greg Bottaro in a journal called Humanum, where he kind of pulls out what's implicit in the church's teaching on human dignity and the feminine genius, to argue that this is what we can say as the masculine genius of all human persons have this calling to master and to steward the external world around us. But the masculine genius is to do this with a particular ease, a particular intensity, a particular obviousness, which I think is why you would tend to ask your dad to change your car tyre. Not
Yes.
because it is exclusively the role of the man to do so and only men can do it, but because they do it with a certain ease, a certain naturalness. And also, I would say, like, men do derive a certain joy as well.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
From like, let me fix the thing.
Yeah.
I have
Yeah.
made the world a better place by fixing the thing.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but then I think you also, with the trousers thing, an author I'd like to recommend on fashion,
Yeah.
which I'm not an expert on, is Regina Doman.
Okay.
She's a Catholic author. She's got a Substack. I can't remember the name of it, but if you just Google Regina Doman, and she talks a lot about fashion from a Catholic perspective.
Okay.
And being really intentional about finding the feminine genius in what we wear. And for some of us, trousers are simply more comfortable and more practical,
Yeah.
and also more elegant for your body shape.
Yeah. Yes.
So there.
Yeah.
For others, dresses are more comfortable, more practical, more elegant for our body shape.
Yeah.
But if we're thinking of it in terms of what are the fundamental underlying principles of how I want to present myself to the world, I want to present myself as a woman who possesses that feminine genius, who's been given that beautiful capacity by God for motherhood, for communion with others. These are the underlying principles of what I want to present to the world. But there's no hard and fast blueprint of how woman in the abstract does this. There's only women.
Yes.
There's only us.
Oh, I love
There's only us embodied. There's only
Yes.
Sister Carino's femininity
Yes.
or Delphine's femininity. And so how we embody those virtues, those principles, is going to look slightly different, because our bodies and our personalities are slightly different, even though they're all human bodies, they're all human personalities.
Yeah. And all women.
Yeah, exactly, and all women. And I think having that confidence in the fact that actually the church proposes to us a vision of femininity, but it doesn't impose a blueprint of femininity on us. It proposes for our belief, this is what God has revealed to us about your dignity. In terms of how you live that out, is a matter for the discernment of your formed conscience, but it's not to be imposed on you, it's to be proposed to you. And actually we have a great deal of freedom, understood correctly, understood in the Christian sense, freedom of that rightfully ordered self-mastery to say, I'm going to take what the church teaches and I'm going to apply it in my life, knowingly, with spiritual maturity and with spiritual freedom, and having the confidence to say, it's going to look a bit different from the woman over there. It's going to look a bit different from the woman over there, because we're different people. But sharing that same dignity and that same feminine genius.
I love that, and I actually think that this brings us back to this concept of embodiment, because when we're only looking at role models online and we're being served an algorithm of a very specific looking or specific style of women, we forget to just look out in the world and see there's so many different styles and manifestations of womanhood by biological women. I think a lot of the reason why I thought I have to wear like dresses, like long dresses the whole time, and you know, it wasn't practical. It put me in some situations where I was tripping up on myself or just not quite very helpful, is because I was desperate for this blueprint of how do I be a good Christian woman. And this conversation with you has just been so, I think, healing to hear, because it's like you're meant to be the woman that God created you to be. And because you are women, you are womanly and you are feminine. And I think that's going to resonate with a lot of people. But sister, I'd love to finish by asking, you know, in a world where we are so divisive, women versus women, women against men, how can we go out there and like live out our feminine genius in a way that can help to heal some of that friction in the culture today?
I think firstly to commit ourselves in God's grace to growing in it, to saying actually this is something that I want to make part of my spiritual journey, my journey of spiritual and human maturity, to say I want to grow in my feminine genius, you know, to ask God in prayer and to really search for an answer to how can I make the feminine genius more obvious, more manifest in the world today. How can I grow into this dignity that I've been given and manifest it more clearly to others? So to really explicitly make that part of our spiritual journey, of our journey with God. And I think also to remember that, you know, fundamentally the reason that we've been created by God as what we call a sexually dimorphic species, so created with physical distinctions between men and women, is ultimately to make communion possible. You know, to make this is a family-friendly podcast, but you know, to make communion possible. And actually, what's true on the physical level is true on the spiritual and the psychological level as well. That if we're different from each other, it's because this is meant to enable communion in some way. That living out those differences in a way that's respectful of them and finding ways to work together and to be compatible is part of living out that communion. And so if we find differences between men and women, these are meant to be fruitful ways in which we can collaborate and to find communion with each other, rather than things that are meant to drive us apart, because that's not ultimately what they're for in the plan of God.
No. So what I've really taken from this is communion, community, embodiment, and just really living out God's truth. So thank you so much, sister,
thank you for
coming
having me,
on. And
thank
as always,
you.
God bless. See you later.